everybody. Welcome back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering women through storytelling and education. Today, we're having a little bit of a different episode. We're talking about meat. We've never just had an episode talking about meat before. And I'm really excited about it. James Berry started out as a private chef. He shares his story with us, why he's passionate about organ meat. Organ meat is so good for trying to conceive, for a first food for babies, for postpartum, in general. But looking back at cultures, they knew that and they prioritized pregnant women eating organ meat. It's so crazy how people just kind of instinctually knew a lot of information. And it's cool because James explains how organ meats kind of got taken off the market. And I know that now there's kind of a push to bring them back, but we also go into the factory farming industry. There's just a lot of information. It's kind of a longer podcast because we just go on a lot of different tangents. We're both really passionate about food and just kind of spreading knowledge around it. I am still currently trying to find a good place to get affordable meat that is raised ethically and the way it's supposed to be. And it's really hard to find. So I just want everyone listening to know that, doing the best you can is all that we can do, because eating really healthy in this country is not affordable. And we know that. Our grocery budget is something that we're constantly trying to figure out because we don't buy everything organic. It's just not affordable or possible to. And I've been trying to prioritize or figure out what we can, what we're not going to, just making sure that we're washing fruits and veggies really well. Can make a huge difference. So when you're getting your fruits and veggies, making sure that you're washing them before you eat them can really help get any residue of pesticides and herbicides off. I try to get produce that's actually imported because even Mexico has outlawed glyphosates and some of the other really horrible pesticides. Most of Central America doesn't use them. If something's product of Mexico, I'm cool, I'm not going to buy it organic. I'm just going to wash it really well. And we're all just kind of doing the best that we can. But I love these topics. I'd love to find a way to make this food more affordable for people. I don't know where that change starts, but it's got to start somewhere. And even just having these conversations is great. I hope everyone had a happy Father's Day this last weekend. And next weekend is going to be the interview out with Corey Robertson. And then I just have some really awesome stuff in the books, guys. Oh, Kat Zingano, who is a Bellator fighter. She fought with UFC for a really long time. She was actually the first mom to fight in the UFC, and she was the last person to beat Amanda Nunes. So anybody who follows UFC knows what language I'm speaking right now. And I interview her, and it's really cool to hear from a female fighter who's a mom. And she's really awesome. I had a really great time talking with her. And just some really great other interviews coming out. I have a little stash that I'm storing up here, just trying to interview as much as I can. Like I said, there's going to be some podcast changes coming up over the next 6 months. Still trying to figure all of that out, rebranding and stuff like that. Some other changes that I'm excited about. I'm also going to be working on some courses and stuff to offer you guys. I realize that I don't talk a lot about my work on here. I usually just interview other people. But I'm very, very passionate about women's rights in healthcare. I'm very passionate about knowing your options and your rights in birthing and in labor and delivery, in why a birth plan could be very helpful. It has really nothing to do with your plans. It has to do more with the education and empowerment that comes with it, and building your support team around you. And that doesn't mean you have to have a doula or anything like that. But obviously I'm a huge advocate for doulas. But choosing your provider wisely and having talks with your partner, giving them information, best way to support you, things like that. So I'm working on some course information and looking forward to sharing more on Instagram, on here, and then in some courses that I'll be offering. So, all right. Well, I'm going to dive into this interview. I can't wait for you guys to hear from James. All right, everyone. I'm super excited. I have James Berry here with me, and we've had several conversations before. If you've watched the Instagram Live, I had him on for my Hump Day series, and I've been on Pluck's Instagram as well, and they just have this awesome company all about organ meats, and I'm super excited for this topic today, and I'm super excited to have James here with me. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I would love for you to tell us. So I guess to me, you're like the organ meat guy now. Like you're who I would go to talk to about it. And there's lots of information we're going to learn about that today. But who are you and how did you come to be so passionate about spreading knowledge around organ meats?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm actually a trained chef. I've been a chef in the health space for 16 plus years. And food was always something I was passionate about when I was a kid. But for some reason, at my young age, I was like, this isn't a career. It's a hobby. I don't know why I thought that. I think it's because, back in the day, if you wanted to be a chef, you had to own a restaurant. And I think that's expanded a lot in our modern times. I think chefs are now celebrities, and it's cookbooks. It's, journalism. It's creating product, testing product. There's so many things now. And, but then for whatever reason, I thought it was a hobby. So I didn't step into it as a career until after 9/11. It was that event that made me kind of audit my whole life and just go, what am I doing that has heart? I only wanted to do things that truly had heart, and cooking was something that really I had always had heart with, but I wasn't doing it on a regular basis. And so I started looking at schools. I found this school in New York. It no longer exists, or at least the program that did exist folded into another program, but it was the Natural Gourmet Institute. And it was known for fusing healthy cooking. So, we think of health. I mean, there's all of these definitions of health, right? But a lot of times it's the illusion of health. I'm sure you may, and or have talked about, like, for example, sprouting grains, like soaking grains and sprouting them, which makes them more digestible in the human body. Well, most chefs don't know that. They just cook grains, and they know to put fat in it and salt in it and make it taste good, but they don't understand like how to properly cook things. So I was taught that. And the school was very much a school known for private chefing. And that is what I wanted to do. So then I got out of that school and started miraculously building this amazing resume of working with all these celebrities and business people, billionaires. I mean, it was just insane. It was one of those things where it was the first time in my life where I think I tapped into kind of maybe my purpose or something cosmic, because people came to me. I still worked hard, but it was almost like I got back double what I did. And it was really wonderful. But what I hit during that process was this kind of feeling of, I feel like I'm only helping people that have money. I feel like I'm finding that the way I'm cooking for them is helping. It's moving their health needle in ways that previously they hadn't with food alone. And I started just to feel like I need to conceive of a way to help as many people as possible and not just have it be restricted to, having millions of dollars or something like that, where you can afford a private chef. And so I conceived and I created a business called Wholesome to Go, and it was a meal delivery service. This was ironically right when the economy crashed. So this was in 2004 that I created it, but I built it from one client on up for 8 years. And it was a real grind, and it was a real learning experience, but we served a lot of people. And I believe we even kind of helped shape a little bit of the prepared meal services in LA because we were really about not just following the trends at the time. We were really about like, we believe this is healthy. And we were gluten-free before it was trendy. We were really focused on like whole foods. As I mentioned, soaking our grains. We were doing a lot of the things like very Weston A. Price kind of foundations. We were doing all that stuff before it was trendy. And then kind of to shorten the story, then my wife and I had our child. We wanted to move out of LA. That's where we were at the time. And so I sold the business, moved to Portland, Oregon, and then had this idea for a functional food that surprisingly didn't exist, which is Pluck, which is an organ-based seasoning. So we're using freeze-dried powdered organs with herbs and spices. And luckily, fortunate for me that no one else had ever conceived of doing that. So we are the first of its kind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a cool idea. And I'm super excited to dive into the whole organ meat thing. We are going to take a quick break to talk about a meal service that has made my life easier, and that is Freshly. They offer chef-made, nutrient-packed, delicious meals delivered straight to your door, and they are fresh. No cooking required. You pop them in the microwave for a few minutes, and they are done. Grocery shopping and cooking can be a pain, especially right now, and Freshly has your back. Your meals arrive cooked and fresh every single week, so you can keep your fridge stocked. I know for me, at the end of the day, I have decision fatigue. I've made so many decisions that I'm like, I don't want to decide what to cook for dinner. And for me, it's just really nice to have Freshly on hand a few nights a week to not have to cook after I've already made breakfast and lunch. So I just feel sometimes like I'm cooking all day. Ordering is easy. You visit freshly.com and you can choose from over 30 delicious, satisfying meals. They have peppercorn steak, sausage baked penne, chicken pesto bowl. One of my favorites is the buffalo chicken. I love me some spicy buffalo chicken. It is really good. And right now you can go to Freshly. They are offering the listeners $40 off your first 2 orders when you go to freshly.com/mamas, and you can stop stressing about dinner. Go to freshly.com/mamas for $40 off your first 2 orders. That's freshly.com/mamas for $40 off your first 2 orders. Now back to the episode. You had mentioned something earlier about sprouting grains, and that actually really isn't something that we've talked on the podcast before.
Okay.
We have like a few health episodes here and there, but they tend to be like really focused maybe either on one topic or just kind of like sprinkled through, because I know sometimes people just also get sick of like hearing all things health all the time. So we haven't really talked about it, but that is like a good tip for people listening is soaking or sprouting grains makes them easier to digest on your system.
Yeah, and it's not as complicated as I think some of these natural ways of cooking and thinking of food seem. I know before I became a chef, I know that, for example, hummus seemed like this grandiose, luxurious thing, and I was like, how is that created? That must be so hard. And then I learned how to do it, and I was like, oh, this is incredibly easy, and why aren't we all making it ourselves? Why are we spending so much money buying it? And so it's the same thing with sprouting. Like really, you want to think of it from nuts, seeds, grains, and legumes even. But nuts and seeds and grains, they are seeds. You know, they want to survive, and so they have protectant in them. And basically, when they're not soaked in water, which is what prepares them to blossom and bloom, that protectant that they have basically restricts their nutrients from going into your body, and sometimes even takes nutrients out of your body. So the minute you just soak them in water, so like whenever I buy nuts, I always buy them raw and unsalted. And then I put them in a bowl and I fill them, you don't want to fill it right up to the top. Like you don't want to fill it just over the nuts. You want to give it some room, because once the nuts are soaked, they're going to actually absorb the water and it will expand. So you want to go like, maybe an inch above the layer of nuts and just soak them overnight. That's it. Same with the grains. Just soak it overnight. Put it in a big bowl, go to sleep, wake up the next day, drain it, and now it's ready for you to use it. And the nutrients in them will be more absorbable and available to your body.
Yeah. I forget to do that with nuts sometimes, and I do not do well with nuts. So I bet that if I soaked them, I would. They do tear up my digestive system crazy.
I find when you soak them, it really does make a huge difference. And even I'll tell a story. This is fascinating. So I was working with this restaurant group on their menu, supporting, kind of consulting and helping them develop it. And there was a gentleman who was on the team who was sensitive to walnuts. He wasn't allergic. He wouldn't go, he wouldn't have to be hospitalized by eating, but they affected, he could feel like it kind of buzzing in his mouth, and it made him just not feel well. And I was like, if you're open to it as an experiment, let me soak the walnuts first, and then I'll lightly roast them. And then will you try them? And he said, yes. And he did. No issues.
Yeah. That's crazy. Huh.
And I find they taste better too. I mean, particularly things like walnuts, those are a little bitter. And when you soak them, they're not.
Interesting. Yeah. I gotta get back to trying that. I just almost avoid nuts just in general, just because I don't do well with them.
Which is not a bad thing. I mean, I think we're told that we need to be eating so many nuts, but we really don't. I mean, it is something I personally am also limiting as well.
Yeah.
But when I eat them, I make sure to soak them. You know what I mean? I think it's like, keep them at a minimal, but when you do eat them right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I would love to dive into organ meats. And it's weird because it seems like, I guess because I'm in that season of my life of like having kids, working as a birth doula, and just like studying pregnancy and prenatal nutrition and stuff, like organ meats is something that comes up a lot that I see. And for me, it almost seems like this new concept of, we should be eating organ meats, but yet it's not a new concept at all. It's actually a very ancient way of eating, and cultures knew the benefits and used all the parts of the animal. So I would love to just kind of dive into that. Like, and if you know the answer, I'm not sure, of like, why did we stop?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do know a little bit about that. I want to first say that I did not grow up eating organ meats. So anyone that's using that as an excuse, I'm with you. Like, I didn't grow up like that. And sadly, most of us didn't. But if you talk to your parents, those of us in our 40s or late 30s or 40s on into our 50s and beyond, if you talk to your parents or even your grandparents, they all did. Mm-hmm. And so it's fascinating that suddenly it stopped. And, it actually goes back to economy, that basically organ meats were always a cheaper cut. They were more affordable. And over time, they were perceived as poor person's food. And before World War II, whereas muscle meat, the more expensive cuts, were like, this is a representation of having money, more luxurious. And so before World War II, those were the cuts that most people were purchasing. The wealthier were purchasing more of the loins and the filet mignons, that kind of stuff. And then the kind of middle class were purchasing every now and then those expensive, but more on a regular basis, the stew meats, the little, a little bit cheaper ones, the ones that you have to cook a little longer, right? And then organ meats were kind of like the cheap of the cheap. And when World War II happened, so many of the muscle meats were going abroad to feed the soldiers that the government actually created a program to re-educate people around organ meats. And so they actually started marketing like, hey, and trying to kind of destigmatize the whole economy of it and more focusing on the nutrition and how important it was, because they were worried they were going to run out of meat if people didn't start eating. And so that's why our parents and our grandparents of a certain age, they were all eating when they were a kid, because that's what they were being sold by the government. Mm-hmm. We never want to underestimate the power of the government. Like, when the government starts putting out a message, people do listen. Mm-hmm. I mean, look what's happening right now, right? With the vaccines and COVID. It's like, the government talks, people listen, and it can greatly affect economies when the government suggests something. And that's totally what happened with organ meat. Now, as to why organ meat then fell out of favor, that could be a lot of reasons. I think it does go back again to economy, that people just tend to sometimes stay with. They think if it's cheap, then it's not good. I think also that a lot of our parents were forced to eat them, and so they associate them with, icky, I don't want to eat this. A lot of people back in the day were taught to just boil everything to death. Mm-hmm. So there's no nuance with food. It was just like disgusting. You talk to anyone from that period, it's like, how did you eat like Brussels sprouts? Oh, they were just boiled, and they were like, like ugly lime green, and they were just disgusting. I'm like, yeah, because that generation was taught due to disease to kill, like just overcook everything. Mm. And of course now we know differently. Right. But I think we now have these very, these stigmas with organ meat. We have this idea that they taste bad, which I'll be the first to admit is not true. Like, and we can go into what I believe is the gateway of, like, if you want to ease into eating organ meats, I'll explain to you the ones that really don't taste bad at all that you should start with. So the taste is one. We've lost the art of cooking it. Like we don't know how to cook them anymore. Like most people think when you think of organ meat, they think you either of liver and onions or they think of pate.
Right.
And they kind of can't go outside of that box.
Right.
And then the third is, that we know we need to eat them, but we don't want to cook them. Like I said, we're worried about the taste. So then the only other option is to take them as a supplement, and that's expensive, and you forget to take them. So there's just those three hurdles are really, they're very real and they're difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would definitely love to get into the taste, a little bit as well, but I mean, that makes sense. We're going to take a quick break to talk about Love Every. It is something that has made my parenting life easier because you have a baby, they hand you your baby, they're like, here, go home and raise this kid. And you have no idea what you're doing, what they need. For me, I'm like, what toys can she play with? What stages is she growing in? And that's where Love Every came in handy for me, because you get the right toys at the right time. They do all the research for you, and it's just more than a box. They give your family a support system for a brighter future. Each play kit includes the play guide that has expert tips, ways to play, do-it-yourself at-home activities, and you can follow them on social media, and their blog delivers a lot of science-backed and stage-based fun. One of the reasons I love them is because their play kits help your kids build confidence, and it helps you build confidence in your parenting, because it takes the guesswork out of what am I supposed to be doing. It's really convenient. There's less clutter and chaos because they're modern and minimal design toys, and they're safe and sustainable materials, which is something that is super important to me. Another thing that I love is that they are Montessori-inspired details in these toys, and they really took time to see what your kid actually needs and how they're developing, and they've worked with researchers just to really make these amazing products. So you guys can get these play kits delivered that are expert designed play essentials straight to your home every 2 to 3 months, starting at $36 a month. You can activate free content tailored to your child's age and get a peek inside the play kits at Love Every's website. Visit loveevery.com/mamas to get started. That's LOVEVERY.com/mamas to get started. Now back to the episode. So my dad ate organ meats and still did. I remember as a kid growing up, when we'd have like chicken or something, my dad always ate like the gizzard, like whatever. He ate all of that. But he also, when he was young, had like a ranch, and they didn't have a lot of money. And so you used everything.
Used the whole animal.
Yes. He had a story from when he was little. One time his mom was getting ready to like go into town, and he accidentally I don't know if it was an accident. He had a rock and he shot a slingshot at a chicken and killed it. And his mom was so mad because then she had to prep it right then. She couldn't like leave for town to like run her errands. She had to like butcher it and do everything because it couldn't sit there dead, you know, till she got home.
Yeah.
So she was like so mad at him for like killing this chicken.
Oh my gosh.
But, I mean, and even now I know my dad likes organ meats, but it's not something that you just find at the store. And I'd like to talk about accessibility as well, because I know like one grocery store around here that I can get calf liver at. And even then it's not, there's no like, I don't know what it's been fed. I don't know where it comes from. There's no like information really on it. So it's not really something that you can just browse through your local grocery store and really find as well. So it's like, what are people doing with all these organ meats, you know?
Yeah, well, that's the truth of what, you know, when we were talking about, well, what happened after World War II? Why aren't we still eating it as much? And I think one of the big issues is that, you know, we went to that factory farming, right? And so we went to this different way of raising animals. And it is a myth, you know, like there's this idea that in the US we're not using all the animal, but if you talk to a slaughterhouse, they are using every piece, but they're just using it in ways that are different from, let's say, France or Italy. Like France or Italy is using every part of the animal for food. Mm-hmm. And so they really care about the quality of that animal, what the animal was fed, how it was raised, the environment. In the US, depending on the slaughterhouse, depending on the company associated with it, a lot of it goes to dog food. And so they label it as not for human consumption. And sometimes it gets fed back to the CAFO and, you know, the animals that they're growing for industrial use. And that's where you get stuff like mad cow disease, and you get these issues like trichinosis in pork, for example. That's not an issue with a healthy pig. Mm-hmm. That is an issue from conventional ways of raising animals. Basically, they were feeding these pigs sick animals.
Yeah.
And then they became sick. So, you know, the conventional way of raising animals is so confusing because you're right. You go to the butcher shop or, you know, the regular grocery store and you don't know. You have to assume if you're going to a place, I'm just throwing out names. I'm not necessarily, I don't know specifically, but like Safeway or Kroger, you know, these kind of conventional grocery stores. And if that meat counter is not specifying that it's grass-fed, grass-finished, or pastured, or anything like that, then you have to assume it is conventional. And most likely, they won't be selling the organs because those animals typically are sick, and that means the organs are sick. In the U.S., that's one of the first things USDA looks at is they cut open the liver of one of those animals to see if it was a sick animal. Mm-hmm. But they'll still sell the meat. They just won't sell the organs. It's really interesting. So it's such a weird, horrible industry. There's something I just learned that is so disturbing to me. And I literally just learned it about 30 minutes before this call. And I kind of don't know what to make of it. So I'm still processing it, but I'll share it. I'm reading Camus Davis's book, Killing It. And she's someone who started the Meat Collective here in Portland, Oregon. And she was basically someone back in the day who wanted to be a butcher. She was a food writer, and then she wanted to be a butcher. And so she went and studied some butchery in France, which then inspired her to come back to the U.S. and try to integrate what she learned here, whether it was at a butcher shop, but also creating classes of whole butchery classes where she could show people what it took to kill an animal all the way to cutting the meat and everything. So she did that she created that here and eventually kind of shook up that industry of making things more accessible and transparent. But she just shared in her book how even small farms, the ones that we think are pasture raised, you know, that are healthy, they legally can purchase USDA certified meat and say it's from their farm. So basically, you don't know what animal you're getting. Like that basically the system is set up where I could create I could create a business and make it look like a beautiful small farm, and I could be selling at the farmer's market, but I could still be buying the exact same USDA conventional meat. As long as it's USDA certified, I can be selling it at the farmer's market under my farm's logos and my farm's pretense. And I do not have to disclose to you that it didn't come from my farm. All I have to disclose is what slaughterhouse, what USDA slaughterhouse it came from. And that's usually stamped on the meat. And this came up because in her book, she was getting pork from this one small farm and in Oregon, and for the company that they were butchering for. And one day they got some of the pork and they were like, wait a second, this is paler and it's larger and it doesn't have as much fat as what we're used to. Like, what's going on? And she started digging. And she found out what I just shared you. And then even when she called the small farm to ask them, like, is this from your farm or is this from from the slaughterhouse? They would not own it because they legally didn't have to. She said they denied it. But she knows, she talked to the USDA person and they verified, yes, small farms, people that sell at farmers markets do it all the time. And I do not know what to do with this information, because how are we supposed to know what we're buying if there's no transparency, if there's no kind of honesty around how something is being raised, how it's being fed? I mean, I feel at a loss sometimes with our food industry here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just so disturbing.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I feel like people don't recognize either. Like, you made the comment about the meat looking different. And my sister and her husband buy a cow, or they buy a pig every year. And my sister was telling me how, like, the meat that they buy, and their friend owns the thing. They like know him. They know that the pig comes from there and how it's raised and everything. And she was telling me how the meat looks different than the meat you buy in the store. She's like, it looks so different. And I recently just watched Seaspiracy, and that's like, the thing with the salmon, right? Like, they catch salmon, they can catch it in Alaska, they'll ship it to Asia to be dyed pink, and then send it back to the United States to be sold. And it's like, what is happening here? Like, what is going on in our food industry? It is so outrageous. Like, just have the real thing, you know?
Oh, and it's getting worse because, you know, what's happening right now. I mean, I know we're going a little off topic with the organs, but it's really all connected. I mean, people need to understand that our agricultural systems right now in the U.S. are a mess, and they are contributing to the kind of the end of the world. That basically where our food is nutrient deficient, our soils they're not even soils anymore. You can't even call them soil; it's dirt. Mm-hmm. Our land is becoming dirt. We've lost the topsoil where we are going to move ourselves towards extinction if we keep doing these things. And yet we have solutions. Regenerative agriculture is a solution. No tilling. We know how to raise animals, but when we turn everything into a commodity and we just want to, make money, and we're not caring about that quality and the effects of what we're doing, then it's an end game, just to steal the Marvel universe, thing. It's truly an end game. We are driving ourselves towards extinction, and it's just so disturbing. But what's happening, what I was going to share is that the industry. So what's happening is that we are creating this poor industry, this conventional way of looking at food. And so we're creating these sick animals, and we're creating this food that's not nutrient efficient, it's not nutrient dense, right? And then that is making everyone look at our food system go like, well, we shouldn't be eating animals because they're just ruining the earth. It's ruining the environment. But the truth is, if we raised animals properly and in regenerative farming, we'd actually be contributing to the environment. We would actually be making the air better. Mm-hmm. But it's because of this conventional way of agriculture that they are right. Yes, we are adding, off-gassing. We are making the environment worse. Mm-hmm. But so what's happening is because we're doing that, there's this new solution is, well, let's just not eat meat. and all these, they're going to try to get a bill passed here in Oregon, and I'm sure it's going to try to spread to other states where they're trying to make it so that farms cannot sell their meat. Like, so let's just say you are raising your animal properly, that you won't be able to sell it to the public. They're basically going to try to make it so that they're going to force us to not even have meat available to eat. And if you go to Dr. Mercola, he has a whole article on it right now, and he can talk about what's happening. And then there's some food. I think it's even Bon Appetit. I'm not sure, but there's some food magazines that are very big that are now saying that they are no longer going to cover any recipes with meat in them. I mean, so there's this whole backlash that's happening against meat. But I think it's really important that we don't just make these absolutes. Like, life is not an absolute. I mean, those of us that are parents, we know there are gray areas, right? Nothing is absolute, but we're treating things like they're absolute. And we're it's, in a sense, the way I look at it is like we're stabbing ourselves in the hand, in the arm, right? With a knife. And then we're looking at the blood that's coming from our arm and we're going, oh, how did that happen? Mm-hmm. Well, let me go, spray this toxin on my arm to stop this blood, instead of realizing, wait, I stabbed it with this knife, whatever the knife is, with this conventional way of raising cattle, with the pesticides that we use on our crops, like we did this, but we're not wanting to go back to and change that. Instead, we're trying to figure out a Band-Aid for what's going on currently. And they're trying to say the Band-Aid is, well, let's just not eat meat. Let's just make it almost outlawed. And it's like, that's not the solution.
Right. No, not at all. I mean, not supporting factory farming would be a start, but I mean, we don't have to get into this because I want to dive into like the benefits of organ meats. But the hard part with our country, though, too, is if you're going to buy meat from a farm and if you're going to buy organic meat or grass-fed meat, it's just not affordable for a lot of people. If you're buying a regular steak that's come from a factory farm versus one that's grass-fed, grass-finished, it's like triple, sometimes quadruple the price. People can't afford that. And so it's hard to make that switch. And I feel I'm very passionate about that issue as well. Is like, I'm learning so much about health lately, just like this last year. But I think just everything that's happened this last year has opened my eyes more to the accessibility for people. So for me, it's just even in health, like people don't have access to a good provider that they want when it comes to birthing. And I see that all the time. And the same is with food. It's like, okay, if we want to eat better, but in order to buy organic, to buy whatever, like it's not in a lot of people's budget. And that's just really, really unfortunate. And I feel like there has to be something done about that too, because it's just not doable, I guess, for the majority of people.
Sometimes it feels like being healthy is only available for the rich. Right. That's how it feels. But there is something to that. So we are under the wrong impression around food. We have to remember our government is subsidizing our crops, which are then fed to the animals. So a lot of the conventional agriculture and animal ranches, those are subsidized. So we actually are not seeing the true cost. Our tax dollars are paying the farmers for growing the corn, for growing the soy, and then that's being fed to those conventional cows. So then those animals have been bred to gain fat really quickly, and they are killed at a very young age. I mean, like I covered this on my Instagram, and chickens, for example, I mean, this is horrific. So chickens, the breed that we use is a very specific breed that is known for growing very large, very quickly. Those chickens are killed at 7 weeks, and they grow so fast. So the fat and the meat that is grown on them is so fast that their little hearts and organs don't catch up. So imagine a child. I know it's different. Human age is different than chickens, but still, they equate it to like a child who's like basically 6 months old, who weighs 300 pounds. That's how the chickens are. And so a lot of the chickens in the conventional way of doing poultry, they die of heart attacks because their little 7-week-old hearts can't handle the 300-pound baby that they are now. And so, I mean, this is a real problem. But what people don't understand is that to let a chicken, like in Europe, they let their animals grow longer. And, you know, whenever you allow your animal to age longer, it's going to cost the farmer a lot. Chickens eat a lot of protein. So if you're not allowing them to pasture, that means you're feeding them, you know, and protein is the most expensive part of the meal. Like corn and soy, that's cheap. That's why the conventional farms use so much of it.
Yeah.
But actual protein is expensive. Mm-hmm. And so you talk to any of these small farmers, and this is the truth, is a lot of the small farmers, they want to do us right. So they want to use the proper breed. They want to let them age longer. They want to feed them properly. But to your point earlier about how it looks different, right? What also tastes different. When you raise an animal properly, let it age, the meat is actually it's kind of more gamey. It's got more flavor. And in the US, we are not used to that. So a lot of times, like, people are kind of shocked by the flavor. And then also they don't get as big. Mm-hmm. So those 7-week-old chickens, if you look at an heirloom chicken that's been allowed to age to about even just double, like, you know, let's say 20 weeks, they'll still be smaller than that 7-week-old hybrid, you know, conventional chicken. Because chickens, you know, they weren't designed to grow like that. A real chicken, a wild chicken, if that even exists anymore, but like an heirloom chicken, they're more dark meat than they are white meat. They have thicker bones, and if they're out pasturing, they're actually active so that their muscles are being used. So it's harder meat. It's just different. The flavor is totally different. So as a consumers, we have to be willing to pay more if we want healthier animals. We have to be willing to change our expectation of how it's going to look and how it's going to taste. Mm-hmm. And if those 3 things fall into place, the farmers will do it. They will change. But I've talked to farmers, and they're like, we tried to do it properly. We tried to do it. It cost us a lot of money. And then people didn't want to buy it because they didn't want to spend, as to your point, they didn't want to spend $30 or whatever, $24 for a bird that was smaller than the $6 bird. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know, and it is that is the hard truth. And then I would also say, you know, to the person that's like, well, how do we make food more affordable? I think that we have to, I think if we keep purchasing the conventional stuff, then the stuff that's being grown properly will always be kind of more expensive, right? So we have to almost first be willing to spend more money to make a change in the industry, because the industry will change based on what we vote with our dollars. They will. But if we keep buying the conventional stuff, they have no reason to change.
Yeah.
So we have to, we almost do have to spend more initially to then get it to lower the price for everyone. But the other thing I say is, like, if you're going to put your money anywhere, that's where I would put it, is your animals. Like, right. I would say spend less on, you know, look up the the dirty dozens, right? And so anything that's on the dirty dozen, the top 10, sure, buy those organic, but then everything else don't, you know, or save money. Don't make it yourself. Don't buy the processed food, because it's always going to be more expensive. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Right. So, like, I can make, for example, if you buy cultured vegetables in a little jar, right? It's going to cost, you know, like almost $10. But if I buy a whole head of lettuce and add some salt to it and make my own kraut, I can make 3 times as much kraut as I just bought for $10, and it costs me $2 for that cabbage.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's the sad reality, is we have to start making our own stuff if we want to lower our food bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually want to make my own sauerkraut. I was reading about that the other day. And just like making sure, like, if you're not buying organic, making sure that you're just washing your fruits and veggies really well before you eat them. So let's dive into organ meats. We were talking about, I mean, you and I are both like super passionate about these topics, so we could like talk forever about it. And I feel like I had a million other questions come up in my mind while you were talking, but I want to dive into organ meats. And more than that, just also organ meats when it comes to fertility, pregnancy, and everything like that. So again, like ancient cultures knew how important using the whole animal was, but also even focusing that nutrition for people, for women who were pregnant. They would kind of be offered those meats first, like kind of have first serve at them because of the nutritional profiles. So what makes these organ meats so amazing?
Yeah, well, there's a myth out there that a lot of people think that organs are where we store our toxins, right? So that a lot of people think, oh, I shouldn't be eating organs because that's where we store toxins, since a lot of the organs are filtering toxins like the liver and the kidney, right? But that's actually not true. The liver, it's just a filter, and it's where things get processed, but they don't get stored. Now, if you're a sick person, yeah, you're going to have sick organs. And that's why, as we talked about earlier, the quality of where you get these organs is really important. And sadly, we do have to look outside our country for this. Your main option is if you're here, you go to a farmer's market and you can talk to the farmer, and I'm keeping my finger, if you can see me, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and the farmer is in integrity, which, is key from my recent learning. If the farmer's in integrity and you find out, that they're raising them properly and feeding them properly, then that is going to be a good place to buy organ meat. Otherwise, you have to go outside of the country, and the two countries that are doing it right are New Zealand and then parts of Latin America, in Argentina, for example. And that's where, for example, we get our freeze-dried powdered organ for Pluck, is we get it from New Zealand, because it's an island. They're able to control. Cattle is one of their biggest industry. And they actually ship a lot of it to China, of all places, because the Chinese eat a lot of beef, but they also eat a lot of organ meat. And so it's part of their economy. And so they've invested in it. They make sure that they don't use GMO seeds. They make sure that they don't use the hormones. They do grass-fed, grass-finished. It's very, very important to them, the quality of what they're doing. And so quality is really important when you look at organ meat. But organs, talk about the bang for your buck. Organs are the multivitamin, nature's multivitamin. So if you want to get a bang for your buck, and you can find one of these quality purveyors of organ meat, you're going to get more for what you spend. So the organ meat's going to be cheaper than the muscle meat, first of all, but the nutrients in it, like you said, around prenatal, like if you look at a prenatal vitamin, it's everything that's in organ meat.
Right.
And I'm not saying to not take prenatals, but I am saying, like, if you are thinking of getting pregnant, if you are pregnant, if you just had your child and you're trying to replenish your body, if your child is now eating their first foods, like, organ meat should be part of your diet, because it's all the nutrients that you're supposed to, that build life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because, because I do think supplementation is important in pregnancy. Ideally, though, you're getting most of your nutrients from food and then supplementing what you need. And just when it comes down to it, like, we aren't getting enough folate. We aren't getting enough of all the great nutrients that are, like you said, in organ meats. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, even just eating like an organ meat once a week is like so much better than anything else that you could put in your diet. It's literally like it's a superfood.
It is. And you can, no joke. I mean, like, if we were just to talk about now, what foods out there do you associate as being superfood? Like, most people say kale.
Right.
Most people say blueberries, maybe acai berries. Mm-hmm. I mean, is there anything else? Maybe some people think carrots are, I don't know, but. I don't know.
Yeah, like goji berries.
Goji berries, right? But you put, and some people say, oh, well, grass-fed beef, okay? But you take all those items, even grass-fed beef, and you put it up against grass-fed beef liver blows them all out of the water. And not just by a little bit. Like, the numbers are sometimes 7, 10, 12 times higher. Mm-hmm. So when I say it's a bang for your buck, I mean it. Like, it's cheaper than muscle meat and it's way more nutritious. And I talked about earlier about, like, well, but people associate it as not tasting good. So here's the trick. So the heart is not, for some reason, people always think liver. When they go to organs, they always think liver. And I think it's because the liver is one of the more nutrient dense, more available, right? It's harder to find like pancreas in your grocery store. Mm-hmm. They just don't sell it, right? But the heart actually is closer to muscle meat than it's not. So meaning it actually doesn't taste texture wise that different. And it's typically sweeter. Then like the liver has more of a kind of irony because it's very high in iron. So it's very kind of got that metallic-y taste, but heart isn't like that. And so I always tell people, like, if you're going to ease into organ meats, this is how I would do it. I would actually start, and I know this is a shameless plug, but it's true. I would start with Pluck, my product. And it's because Pluck is a gateway. It doesn't taste like organ meat, but yet you're getting the benefits of organ meats. And it's no different than salt and pepper in your food. So I would start there. Then I would go to chicken livers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, chicken livers aren't bad at all.
I'm sorry, chicken heart, not chicken livers. Chicken heart. Sorry. Chicken hearts are they're sweet. They're not strong. And you can really like kind of cook them just like almost like quick saute. They cook really fast. You can put them in your spaghetti sauces. You can do whatever you want with them. And you really won't think about the fact that you're eating organ meats. It's not going to be a huge leap. Mm-hmm. Then I would buy like beef liver, but I would keep it frozen. And I think I shared this with you last time. I would take it and I would just grate it into my grind. So if I had ground beef or ground lamb, whatever, I would just grate it. You know, you don't use all of it, just use a little bit and then put it right back in the freezer. And then from there, I would start incorporating maybe more, higher percentage in my meats. But if you're ever adding it to like ground meat, I really wouldn't go over like 20% because it really will start to affect the texture and the taste. But that's kind of how you can start to ease into it. Now, the other way is, and this is a trick a lot of people use, which I think we may have discussed, is they cut off a little piece and then they freeze it and then they just swallow it so they don't chew it. But here's the thing I caution that against is our saliva and the chewing action of our mouth is really important for digestion. It's really, really important. So if you're cutting a piece of liver, and you're just swallowing it and then our stomachs have to digest it without you actually breaking it down, you're making it really hard on your body to get the nutrients. And so in my mind, you're defeating the purpose.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I told you before that I did that with my last pregnancy because I looked up a couple of recipes. I made a pate and then I made these meatballs that were like half ground beef, half liver.
Too much.
Oh my gosh, I could not do it. And I was pregnant and I could taste everything. But my husband ate it. And I was like, babe, can't you just taste that liver in there? And he's like, no, not really. Or maybe it was like, I think it was a third ratio, like a third and 2/3 maybe.
Still too much probably.
Yes. But I could just like taste everything. And I'm like, I tried to eat it. I was like trying to wash it down with something. And I was like, oh my gosh, I could just like taste everything about it. But chicken to me is pretty mild. Like whenever I buy a whole chicken, I always eat everything.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, to me, the ease, the gateway is start with chicken. And obviously, once again, I cannot stress enough that quality. You got to get it from, for chickens in terms of the company that I'm buying from right now that I really like, it's called Cook's Venture. Those are heirloom chickens. You can buy them online. They're at some grocery stores, but like they're not at Whole Foods, for example, yet. But they are here in Portland. At least they're at New Season. So look for Cook's Venture. I don't get any kickback for saying that. I just really like what they're about, and they are using the heirloom chickens, and they're basically a company that created them. Was created because they were looking at how the industry was going, and they didn't like it. They weren't finding products that met their criteria, and so they created it. Mm-hmm. So Cook's Venture is a really good option, and there's many others, but quality is key. Start with the hearts, and I would also offer. We talk a lot about in the health field. We talk a lot about bone broth, right?
Yeah, bone
broth is so good for someone who is once again trying to get pregnant, is pregnant, or just had their baby, and baby's first foods. Mm-hmm. All of it. It is so good, and you can take a little bit of organ meat, like I said, the grating of it, and just grate it into the bone broth and add other things, make it into a soup, add some vegetables, things like that. And you won't taste it as much. Pluck works really well on bone broth as well. You just sprinkle it right in. But anything, to me, getting organ meats is more important, than anything else. If you're in any of those criteria, trying to get pregnant, just had a baby, or baby's first foods, to me, organ meats all the way. Mm-hmm. Organ meats for the win.
When it comes to when it comes to the nutrient profile, like you said, by far it blows everything else out of the water. So, and those nutrients that are in it too are also healing, because before we are trying to conceive, right? When you're trying to conceive, oftentimes, especially if you've been on hormonal birth control or you haven't been eating healthy, you're actually deficient in the vitamins and nutrients that your body needs to sustain a healthy pregnancy. Not saying it doesn't happen. I know a lot of people who were on birth control for 7 years, got off and got pregnant the next month. But you also want to make sure that you have, if you are planning to have a baby. Also, 50% of the births in the United States are unplanned, so there's not a lot of planning for a lot of people. But if you are in that season of your life, making sure that you have those vital nutrients is really important, and it can affect your pregnancies. It can affect the health of you, your child, your pregnancy, and how you feel. With that said, there are still cases where people do everything right and you're pregnant and you feel like crap. Hormones can be very crazy and affect everyone very differently. But it is important, and it is setting yourself up for success, setting yourself up for a successful pregnancy, for health and all of that. And I always share this information too, not to look back and be like, oh, I messed up or I did things wrong, but just to take it and move forward. So if that's the season of your life that you're in, if you're wanting to try to conceive soon, or if you're trying, or you're newly pregnant, or even if you just had a baby and you're hearing this, start getting those organ meats in. Or if your baby's starting to eat food. Jovi hasn't had any organ meat yet, but she has had bone broth. But I also, like I said, I haven't really found a great place here to buy organ meat. I actually just called a farm last week. But now, after learning what you told me, I'm like,
I know, right? You know who a lot of the people in the health field use, that's online, so anyone should be able to get it, is U.S. Wellness Meats. They sell a lot of organ meat, and they even sell things like pemmican, and that pemmican is an interesting one. So it's meat that is dried in a dehydrator, so there's no moisture. And then what you do is you add equal amounts of fat. So it's let's say half a cup of dried meat to half a cup of tallow, and you mix them together, and it creates a bar. And it's how people used to travel in the past. Our ancestors used to, when they would have all these long travels, that was one of the most nutrient rich, protein bars you could bring with you, and it preserves itself. The fat preserves it, so it lasts for. They've found some pemmican from. I want to say years old, and it's still fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So the U.S. Wellness Meats, that's a really good option. They're thinking in that ancestral way and how they sell stuff, and and that's something that's really key too. It's a key part is. We're talking about this ancestral eating the whole animal. And when you think of it from that perspective, you really want to try to eat as many of the parts of the animal. So I mentioned heart, but a part of the animal that they consider an organ that's, could be arguably not the way we think of an organ is the tongue. Beef tongue. If you've ever gone to a Mexican restaurant and gotten beef tongue, it is delicious.
Beef tongue tacos.
Lengua. Right. Lengua. It is so good. And I've made some, and it's not hard to make, and it comes out and you can shred it just like you would carnitas or something. And it's so good. And I just, after I did it, it was once again one of those phenomena for me where I was like, why have I waited so long to try this? Yeah. It's so similar to muscle meat.
That's why.
But that's the thing. It's we almost have to get, I think if you can get past your association with it, and then cook it the way you would other stuff. Like, so don't like kind of put the similar flavors that let's say, like we just had taco night last night and I make this carnitas with, it's a very actually similar recipe that I use for Pluck. It's like smoked paprika, garlic, onion. And if you just use the same seasonings that you would associate with something else, you probably won't even notice it much. Put in some concentrated tomato paste. Like tomato paste cuts a lot of flavors a lot of times. And so it's kind of those safe ingredients to use when you're trying something new. But because if you think about it, if you can if you closed your eyes, let's say you made tongue and you didn't know it was tongue, right? And you closed your eyes, and if it had the same flavors that you're used to with something else and the texture was not weird,
right?
How would you know?
No, I know for sure I've eaten some super sketchy things. Like I've been to 31 countries and I like backpacked and I stayed with like slept on people's couches. And I know I'm pretty positive one place it was not what they told me it was.
It's probably like guinea pig or something.
I had guinea pig in Peru.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I haven't had that. What does that taste like?
It tastes like grass to me. It tastes like, it was very, very like, I tasted like I was eating springtime. That's what it tasted like. This was like 17 years ago. So, but I just remember, it tasted kind of like grass. Like they eat grass and it just tasted very, very gamey and then just like grassy.
Interesting.
And I've definitely eaten some weird things. And I feel like I should be able to get over the organ meat too. Cause sometimes I forget like my past life was crazy. And, I actually drank goat's blood in Kenya. And I'm like, if I drank goat's blood, like I watched them slaughter it. They passed it around. We all drank it. And I'm like, if I could do that, I could eat liver.
Now we have to diverge here. What was that like?
Disgusting. I walked away and immediately regretted it. And I said like a little prayer and I'm like, I don't know. I was like, it tastes like blood, and,
but it was warm. It was probably warm, right? But it didn't make you sick, right? I mean,
I thought I was going to throw up, but I didn't, just because the thought of the blood sitting in my stomach, like not from like drinking it, but I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to throw this up. I just drank blood. And then I was fine.
Have you had, I want to hear more things of what you've had. Have you had snake?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. When I went camping once, the guy I was camping with caught a snake and we cooked it for dinner that night.
What does that taste like?
There wasn't like tons of meat. So you're like peeling off like little pieces of meat and it's like alligator or chicken.
Yeah. What about kangaroo? Have you had kangaroo?
No. I've never been down under. And I haven't had kangaroo. But what they eat a lot in a lot of other countries is goat. Like goat is huge, and that's something that we don't eat here.
Is that it? What do they call it? Mutton. They call it mutton.
Mm-hmm. But like basically in every other country except for here, I feel like they eat a lot of goat.
Well, that's something I've been kind of diving into more of, like when I think about, because I get asked a lot, like, well, you're always talking about the conventional meat and how we shouldn't be eating it, and then you're talking about all the pasture raised and small farms, but what's ideal if you are eating meat? And I'm definitely more and more suggesting, variety. Like, don't just stick with like beef, lamb, and pork and chicken. Like eat venison, eat boar, eat some of these other things that you can find either online or some grocery stores where they keep them is in the freezer aisle. Mm-hmm. But like getting that variety, because a lot of these wild game are so much healthier for us than even some of the small farms. It's just so much better. Yeah.
A sad one that I tried was alpaca.
Why was that sad?
Because they're so cute. Llamas are cute.
I've had alpaca before. That that one's. I mean, that's kind of tastes like beef, right? I mean,
I honestly don't really remember.
Yak tastes kind of like beefy. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
I'm a huge fan of wild game. Of like, my brother-in-law hunts, and whenever he like kills a buck or a deer, like we always go over there and eat it. And I'm a huge fan of it. And I know some people don't like that gamey taste, but I really like it. Like I prefer dark meat when it comes to chicken. Like I usually buy like chicken thighs and things like that just because that's what I prefer. And so I'm a huge fan of like wild game. And so just like with the way, like everything that we talked about in our country, my husband and I talk all the time. We're like, we just need like a small farm. We need to buy land, and we'll just hunt and like have our crops and like do our own thing because it's just so much better that way.
I know, right? I mean, I feel like so many people since this coronavirus, that's a lot of people are going that direction. Like they're buying land and they're building their little, their buffer from all this craziness. And it's not a bad idea. I mean, and I know though, we're both advocates though for trying to help people as much as possible. And I know, so much of these discussions, as you mentioned earlier, these are first world problems. We're luxurious to even be able to talk about health, and it's a really challenging discussion when you're like, okay, how do we change the industry and help as many people as possible? And it's just it's a slow process because it's not just about. It's bureaucratic, right? It's like there's so many things, there's so many pieces that have to change that's beyond just us, choosing what we buy. It's like, we have to stop subsidizing these farms in a different way. We have to, like I had this discussion with someone recently about, well, how do we if regenerative farming is the way to go, how do we do that? And I was like, well, first, it's not just we have to buy regenerative farming. The farmers have to be willing to change their farm. And a lot of them don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge learning curve. And then even more importantly, the banks have to be willing to invest in the farmers that want to switch. And right now, most banks don't understand regenerative farming and will not invest in it. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing before that is that our country has to be willing to invest in regenerative farming as well and stop subsidizing the farmers that are not doing it properly. Mm-hmm. So there's so many moving pieces. Right. Mm-hmm. And it feels sometimes it just feels like it's this giant. It's bigger than us, and that's honestly it's a mantra I kind of have. It's like even when I'm entering anything that's of discomfort or out of my comfort zone, whether it's getting in a cold plunge, mm-hmm. which some people are like, that's death. Don't do that. I mentioned to my mom, and she's like, ugh, the face she got, and it's kind of the same face people get when like, here, try this organ meat. They're like,
right, yeah.
And I have this little mantra. I'm just like, okay, this is not bigger than me, one step at a time, and this will not kill me, and I just, and then I do it. And I get out of my comfort zone because I think it's really important, particularly when we think of our health, when we think of the food we're eating, just like we're talking about, like expanding beyond your comfort zone with food is not a bad thing because our palates they're alive, mm-hmm. right? So it's like you think of someone who drinks a Coca-Cola or something like that 3 times a day. I know people that have done that for 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. If that person then drinks water, they'll taste that water and go, oh, this is so plain. It's so gross, right? Mm-hmm. It's not because water is gross. It's because their palate is all messed up, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to give ourselves the time and the kind of grace to adapt and change, but we're never going to do that if we stay in our comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. One thing that I thought of that is a little bit more cost effective is if you do find a good local farm that is actually raising the meat there, and you can purchase, like go in with another family or something and buy a whole cow or half of a cow. And sometimes, I mean, it's a bigger cost up front but when you break down the cost, it's way cheaper than buying like grass-fed beef at the store. And then it's a little bit more expensive than buying just like factory farm meat. So
yeah, but not much more expensive.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
So it's kind of this bigger upfront cost. But then you have meat for months, like even the year, depending on how big of like what portion of the cow you're going to buy. And it's like I said, a bigger upfront cost, but when you break it down, it's really not that much different than buying.
Yeah. And you'll need like a chest freezer too, obviously. But yeah, that's a great option. I mean, and what's cool when you do that is you get parts of the animal you would never find in a butcher shop. Right. Like, I'm thinking even certain bones, things like that. So just certain cuts. And I think that there is a learning curve there, because you're going to get cuts that you really don't know how to cook. But luckily we have the internet, right? And you can look up anything.
Oh yeah. I was going to ask you. So let's say somebody listening is like, you know what? I'm going to try some heart out. I'm going to go get some heart. Do you have like a favorite resource that you go to for finding good organ meat recipes?
Well, there's a really great cookbook by called "It Takes Guts," and that's all organ meat. And she's someone who we've been promoting with Pluck because she's Canadian and she's the muscle maven on Instagram. But it takes guts, and the whole book is organ meats. And we own it, and we've been using it. We did a variation of her heart jerky, so she has a beef heart jerky, and that's on our website, eatpluck.com. So even on our website, you'll see some organ meat recipes. I put up this pate recipe that's really simple and kind of works for almost any organ, and it makes it taste good.
Yeah.
But in terms of like something like chicken hearts, for example, like chicken hearts really can be treated just like any saute. Like if you were, making a stir fry of any kind, just think of it like just put the hearts in then. And sometimes you don't even have to cut them because they're so small. You can leave them whole. Now the key though is that you just don't want to overcook this stuff, Organ meats, when they get overcooked, the texture changes. I mean, this is true with muscle meat too, but particularly with organ meats, the texture changes and the flavor changes. Mm-hmm. So, and I always tell people when they're cooking, like you got to remember that there's the heat of when it's in the pan, but then the minute you pull it off, so even if you cook it in your pan and then pour it on your plate, there's residual heat. So there's the heat from cooking, but then there's the residual heat and it continues to cook. Even when you put it in the bowl or the pan off of the pan, or the bowl or a plate off of the pan, it's really key to just remember, don't go all the way in the pan. Go almost to where it's done and then pour it into whatever you're doing, a bowl or whatever, and then let it just sit for a little bit and it will continue to cook. Mm-hmm. That's why they always say, let meat rest, for example, like when you cook a roast beef, because if you cut it too early, then basically all the liquids just come out. But if you let it sit there for a little bit, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, the juices will kind of stay intact. They'll stay inside, and it's more flavorful. It finishes cooking, things like that. So think of that with organ meat, particularly with organ meat. And it really cooks fast. I mean, chicken hearts, it's like 3 minutes. It cooks so fast. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's another thing that people, that's a huge plus with organ meats is, how we're always like crunched for time. Like, oh, I got a last minute cooking for dinner. It's like there's nothing faster than if you grate the liver from the beef, that melts. It's just immediate how quickly that will cook. And then same with hearts. They just cook so fast.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'm going to have to try out some of these recipes. I got to call that farm back. You can actually go visit it. So it's like 30 minutes from here. I just want to go visit it and see what's up with it. Cause they have duck eggs and I want to try duck eggs cause I kind of have a chicken egg sensitivity.
Oh, that's right. I remember we talked about this. Yeah, duck eggs.
I want to try their duck eggs out and see if that's
I always suggest that, like, people have, let's say, cow dairy issues. I'm like, well, try sheep dairy, and if it's chicken, try duck, Duck is definitely, you're going to see it's got a flavor, but since you like gamey stuff, you might like it.
Well, I love duck meat. I love duck. Yeah.
So you might like it.
Like all dark meats, basically, I really like. Yeah, I love all that stuff. And I'm wondering if it's also like how I was raised a little bit. Like my cousins, I remember we'd always make our own jerky. They went hunting, always had raw cow milk because they had cows. Just like stuff like that. Like
that's cool.
Yeah. So I'm wondering but I don't know, because I feel like my mom's more picky, but I don't know.
Do you feel like, that comes up a lot with parents, as a chef, like, oh, I have a picky eater, and things like that. And I'm always kind of telling people, it's like, to me, it's the foundations. Like, and so I'm wondering if, like, because you were raised eating a certain way, if you feel like it's, well, I think I may even be able to answer this question myself based on what you've already shared, but do you feel like it's helped you with the rest of your life in terms of how you eat, you know, like, cause I always emphasize it's those first, you know, 8 years of the kid's life, you have control over what they eat pretty much, you know, maybe 6 years, depending on, really, it's when they start school, you start to lose you stop losing the control. Cause now they're around other kids, they're sharing food, they're grabbing food from the no thank you tables and all that stuff. So I'm always like, the emphasis on those first 6-7 years, you control it. Like, do you feel like you benefited hugely from your upbringing?
I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think. I don't feel like I guess I was exposed to like foods like that. But I mean, I also had like mac and cheese and PB&Js and you know what I mean? Like everything else that kids eat. It was super interesting. I talked to a childhood dietitian and there is like definitely something to exposing your kids to different foods and having them try varieties, just even experiencing the sensations, the textures, things like that. But all kids, like there's some things that can be like genetic too, or they go through just like phases of being picky eaters because they're a kid and they're going to like go through that phase. But I can say like growing up though, I don't feel like things were like catered to the kids, you know, like we ate what the adults ate.
That's important to me because that comes up a lot when I talk about picky eating is, like how we do it at our house. Like, so I think these are kind of the themes that come up is, so do you cater to the kids' whims, right? Is one. And then the other is, do you shame them around what they are or not eating? And so I'm really kind of like I'm in the camp of like, you don't give options. Like you only serve one meal because it's going to be more sane for the person cooking, which is usually the mom. But also two is, it's you're modeling like we've cooked dinner. This is what's for dinner. And if the kid chooses not to eat, that's the other part of it is you then don't shame them. You don't force them to stay at the table and be like, you have to eat this. It's like, no, if you don't want to eat it, that's okay. But you don't get something else. Mm-hmm. That's kind of our philosophy. And 9 out of 10, like the kid will, you know, sometimes like they'll fight it and they'll walk away for maybe 20 minutes, but then they'll come back and then they'll eat it and they'll realize it was really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we don't like hold on to it. You know, we're just kind of like, okay, if you don't want to eat it, it's fine. But that doesn't mean you get to go in the refrigerator and like, you know, eat all the foods that you love, you know, the yogurts and the ice creams or whatever all that stuff is, you know? Right.
Yeah. I definitely think it's like important not to shame them or to like force it, but to continue offering it as the option. Like this is like, because they also, a lot of studies show like the more exposure they have. So let's say they don't eat it the first time or the second time or the third time, like they're eventually going to try it and eat it.
Totally.
But I mean, Jovi's so young, so it's like, but we've done the baby-led weaning with her, which means whatever I make for dinner, she eats. So, like the other night I made chicken thighs and broccoli, or no, I made asparagus, I made like a Mediterranean bake basically. And so I gave her like strips of the chicken thighs and asparagus, and that's what she ate for dinner because that's what we had. And I'm just like not... With like work right now and other things, like I'm not going to make like a separate meal for her. And, for breakfast, she eats fruit. She'll just eat like whatever. And lunch, she ate part of my lunch today. Like I just give her whatever I have because I can't like make anything special for her. And I've seen like some cool recipes where I'm like, oh, I should make this like healthy thing for her to try, like a healthy homemade snack bar thing. And I'm just like, it's just not going to happen right now. I'll just, give her whatever I'm eating.
Who needs to put more pressure on themselves, you know, I think parents, particularly moms, already have so much pressure on this idea of like, I have to be perfect or I have to be this. It's like, why? Like, there's no other culture that does it the way we do as in America. Like, I mean, I'm sure you saw that documentary. Well, I can't even remember the name, but we watched it when we were in our first pregnancy. The one where they showed the 5 different families from different countries. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh God, it was a really good one, but it showed like an African someone in South Africa, like family there. They showed Chinese family. They showed just a family in like San Francisco, I think a Norwegian family. And they showed how they were with their children when, their newborns. And it was just fascinating because it's like the South African one just was really like, they really did just like, oh, here's what we eat today. They would mash it up so they could eat it, but that's it. Mm-hmm. And then they even would let them play around big ditches. And, whereas Americans, we were like, no, get away. But the kids innately understood danger.
Yeah.
Things like that. I wish I could remember the name. I feel like I'm not doing justice, but I think if anyone looks up that documentary, they'll find it.
That's so, I don't feel like my daughter innately understands danger. She just dives off of things like completely fearless. But they're fun. They're super fun. Well, I'm so glad that you came on the podcast. I mean, I know that you and I could just chat about like 100 different topics forever. Where can people learn more about Pluck and connect with you at?
Yeah. So, you can get Pluck at eatpluck.com. And we're on, socials at Eat Pluck. And then I'm on my personal is at Chef James Berry. Berry is with an A. And check it out. I mean, it's like I said, it's a gateway. It's what I love about Pluck, and my family uses it in real life where we're actually we walk our talk. We really do use it. But what I do love about it is that it solves all those problems I mentioned at the top of this episode, which is you don't have to know how to cook with it. You can sprinkle it on anything. You can even sprinkle it on your to-go food from your fast food place. It doesn't like you don't need to know how to cook at all. And then you up the nutrients of anything you add it to naturally. And something that we kind of touched on, but we didn't dive into is that organ meat is bioavailable. Right. It's really important. We talked about how nutrient dense it is. But what's different about those nutrients is that our bodies actually recognize them and can absorb them, unlike synthetic vitamins and minerals that you would find in fortified foods and even in some supplements. Right. It's really, really key. You're getting whole food nutrition. Mm-hmm. Right. Not synthetic.
Which, like you said, is super important because your body's like, oh, we can use this.
Yeah.
Whereas like with supplements, I mean, how much of it are you actually like taking and then just peeing out? Totally. Your body can only absorb a little bit of it. So
totally. And also a lot of supplements, depending on the quality of the company, they have fillers in it. So a lot of times you're only buying, it has 20% of the active ingredient. The rest is filler. You just don't know. Particularly if you're buying supplements, for example, from Trader Joe's, it's almost a guarantee.
Trader which is Joe's so heartbreaking because I love Trader Joe's.
I know, but that's why their supplements are so cheap. Is because it's not a pure supplement. It's a kind of a watered down,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. You guys make sure that you go follow Eat Pluck. There's tons of organ meat, like facts on there. They share so many other things about the different organ meats, different parts of the animal and information. So make sure that you go follow them over there at Eat Pluck. Thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I could talk about, again, food forever. I get really passionate about it. And I've been really passionate about the factory farming thing since, oh my gosh, how old am I? For like 20 years. I'm in high school. I didn't eat meat because I grew up in Nebraska and I lived right next to a feedlot. And I just didn't agree with the way that the cows were being raised and I couldn't bring myself to eat it. And it wasn't until a little bit later where I could afford some other protein that I started eating it again. I also, because I started not feeling well and I was deficient in some vitamins and stuff, so I needed to start eating it again. But yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. And let me know who else you want to hear from. Let me know what topics you want. We're going to be expanding into some other stuff. So nothing is off limits. Make sure if you're listening that you rate, that you subscribe, that you're following us on Instagram, that you are a part of our Facebook group, and that you're just connecting with the community. All right. Love you guys. Talk to you next week.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.